Hi, welcome to another episode of the Financial Freedom Podcast. I'm Steve Richardson, a bankruptcy attorney trying to keep people on their path to financial stability and independence through education. Eliminating debt is one of the first steps on the path to financial freedom. Controlling your living expenses and spending within your means allows you to work towards short and long term savings goals. But that's not easy while raising a family. That's why in this episode of the podcast, I talk with Brad Nelson, the debt free dad, to talk about how it can be done. My guest today is the debt free dad, Brad Nelson, who has dedicated his life to serving and helping people with their personal finances. He provides an eye opening outlook on debt and money that challenges today's popular thinking. And through speaking and the Debt Free Dad podcast, social media, and his online membership site, Roots of Personal Finance, which has helped people save and pay off tens of millions of dollars. Welcome to the show, Brad.
Hey, thanks so much, Steve. It's awesome to be here.
It's good for sitting here on a Friday afternoon talking about personal finance. Uh, so I've had some other people on the show and different approaches to um, getting out of debt, which is obviously the first step you need to take towards financial freedom. And I know a lot of people talk about this, including folks like Dave Ramsey. But in order to pay down your debt, you first need to know how much money you have per month to dedicate to that.
Yeah.
So you have to have the money to make the payments. So to calculate that, of course, you need a budget. So what budgeting tips do you have for beginners on how to get a handle on their finances and see how much money they can pay towards debt?
Yeah. Steve, you brought up the financial swear word, budget, right?
Oh, I've
People,
heard people that talk about budgets a lot. Other people say, I hate budgets. I don't think people should have a budget.
yeah,
And I think it's a difference between how OCD you want to be. I think people's objections to budgets is that they can become too rigid, where you're
yeah,
trying to track every single dollar.
right.
And I think that ultimately you don't have to, but
Yeah.
it's a good exercise to find out how much money you're really spending. Because sometimes people, in making a budget, find out, wow, I never realized we spent that much on X.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it
That's,
can really point out some problems and leaks in the financial bucket.
yeah,
So,
for sure.
budget or non budget, or we're talking about finding the money.
Yeah.
So, what tips do you have?
Yeah. And I think the first thing is that mindset, getting that mindset right about budgeting. I think, marketing has made the word budget seem like people who have a budget are cheap, they're broke, they're penny pinchers. There are people who count every single dollar. They don't like to spend money. And that's just really not what a budget is. In fact, if you look up the word budget in the dictionary, none of those words are associated to the word budget. It is simply just a calculation of income and expenses. That's all it is.
Mhm.
And I think over the years, you think about how marketing has used the word budget. Like if you go into a car lot to buy a car, well, are you on a budget? Are you budget conscious? Meaning like you're going to be cheap about the purchase. And so I think this has created a negative mindset around budgeting. At the end of the day, if you make money, any sort of money, you should have some sort of a budget. Call it a cash flow plan, call it a money plan. You call it whatever you want if you don't want to use the word budget, but you should have a determination of what is my income for the month and what are going to be my expenses.
Uh-huh.
The other thing too that I think for a lot of people is a lot of people that I've worked with over the years fall into this perfection thing. Like if the budget's not perfect, like I did it wrong and I'm not good at this. And the reality is your budget is never going to be perfect. Life is just too complicated for it to always be perfect. I've been doing this for so many years, Steve, and there's not been one month where my budget is absolutely perfect.
Mhm.
So we're just trying to get close, right? So just
Right.
understand, like, it's okay that your budget isn't going to be perfect as a beginner. It never will be. We're just trying to get 80, 90% there, and you'll be much better off with doing nothing.
Mhm.
You brought up kind of the first step that I always kind of tell people to do, and you mentioned understanding your expenses. So I think one of the best things, in fact, we shared a statistic on our podcast recently. Over 50% of the millennial generation has no idea what's going on in their bank account. 50% of the generation. And so that's telling me that a lot of us out there, whether you're millennial or Gen Z or whatever, a lot of us aren't really understanding what our true expenses are and where all of our money is really going. So my recommendation when you want to get started is let's first figure that out. Where's your money going? Before we even create a budget, we got to first figure out what the heck is going on with your money. And so I would go back out and print out the last 3 to 6 months of your bank statements, your credit card statements. If you're using apps to buy things like PayPal, Cash App, buy now, pay later. I mean, any of these things that you're using to make financial transactions,
Mm-hmm.
and start printing out these statements or do it digitally, however you want to do it, and start categorizing where all your money's been going on average on a monthly basis. For most people who go through this and do this, Steve, they're mind blowing. In fact, I
Mm-hmm.
haven't really had one person ever come back to me and say, Brad, I knew exactly where all my money was going. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's like, holy smokes, I didn't realize we were spending this much money on X, Y, and Z. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So before you create a budget, you got to know where your money's going. Once you have an idea of where your money's going, now you can decide, okay, do we want to keep these things in our budget? Are these things necessary in our monthly budget? Can we shop some of our services around, to
Mm-hmm.
lower the costs? Um, and what items can we consider keeping long term? We're gonna just keep these. Now, once we have all these numbers put together, now we can start actually filling out a form or a budget, or if you want to use an app or a spreadsheet, whatever kind of tool you want to use to put your budget together. Now, once you have real numbers, now you can put a realistic budget together.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you want to understand what your income is too. It's amazing to me how many people I've worked with, and this is me too. So I'm not going to throw myself under the bus as well. But when I was living paycheck to paycheck many years ago, I never really looked at my paycheck either. What was coming out of it, what was coming out for taxes, benefits, all of those things. So make sure you have a good understanding of what your income is and making sure you're plugging that into your budget so you know how much money you have to work with. All right. And then a big part of being successful with your budget and wanting to actually do it, because I don't want to do one, Steve. I teach this stuff. I practice it, but I don't want to do it just as much as the next person. But the
Mm-hmm.
reason I do a budget on a monthly basis is because I have good short-term and long-term financial goals that I want to reach. And because of that, that's why I'm going to do a budget, because I want to get to those goals.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people who live paycheck to paycheck or struggle financially, a lot of them have very loose financial goals, if any at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it's general. Like, I want to save more, I want to pay off some debt, but they're not real specific enough. So if you don't really have any buy-in or you don't see any value in budgeting, it's likely you'll come up with a lot of excuses on why you shouldn't budget or why you're not going to budget.
Right.
So create some why power in your life about, how is this budget going to benefit me? Well, it's going to get me an emergency fund, or it's going to help me pay down my credit cards once and for all, or it's going to help us go on that cash vacation that we want to go on,
Right.
or put some meaning behind it. And then a budget is not going to seem so much of a chore. It's going to be kind of that tool that's going to help you reduce financial stress and really be able to live the life that you want to live eventually.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I said, as we've been talking, a budget helps you to identify where your money's going. And sometimes you realize you're spending maybe more than you thought, and you need to trim back a little bit to have that money to pay down debt. But as I also said earlier, it can also identify some leaks in the bucket where you're really overspending or spending way too much on certain things. So also what this exercise does, whether you call it budgeting or just cash flow analysis, is it can reveal some bad money habits.
Yeah, again.
And so you can create this budget and you can know where the money's going. But if you don't improve your money habits, it's just going to continue to be a problem. So, any ideas on how people can improve their financial habits?
Yeah, I think first and foremost is understanding that we're human. There's a human side to money. It's not just math. There's emotion, and
Mm-hmm.
you're not always going to get it right all the time. You're going to mess up. You're going to overspend at times. There's times I still do. I've been debt free now for 11 plus years outside my mortgage. I mean, I teach this stuff. I still screw it up sometimes. There's
Mm-hmm.
that human side, and that's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is recognizing what are those habits and what is getting you into those positions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what things are you noticing that are repetitive? Like, a big one is going out to eat for a lot of people. So what are some things that you can do within your life to cut out more going out to eat and maybe more meal planning at home? Maybe it's time management.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, like, a lot of people, this is a big win for a lot of people in our accountability group, is saying no to that work lunch, right? You forgot to bring your lunch to work, and then your coworkers are asking you to go to lunch. And this is something that is repetitive for so many people, and before they know it, it's just a few dollars here and a few dollars there. It equates to like hundreds of dollars a month that they're spending because they're just not taking proper times to plan. So I think you answered it really right away, is that by going through your expenses, you're going to start to see where the leaks are in the bucket. And now it's starting to ask yourself the questions of, how can we start patching some of these things up?
Mm,
Maybe it's shopping. Maybe it's credit card use. Maybe we just don't use credit cards for a while. Put the credit cards away. Maybe we go towards more of a cash system. That cash holds you more accountable because you can actually feel yourself spending cash versus, say, shopping online, swiping credit cards, things like that. So habits take time. And I think those short-term and long-term goals do play a role here too, is because if you have something bigger that you're working towards, say again, you want to go on that cash vacation, or you want to buy that new car, or you want to take your kids somewhere, or whatever it might be, whatever that goal is,
mm,
you're much more willing to forego purchases that are going to keep you from those things if you truly want to achieve them. And
mm,
so I think that's a big part of it, is just your overall financial plan and striving towards creating a better financial life. And if you have those things set in place, it behaviors and habits, not right away, tend to change and improve over time. But you have to stick with it. You have to keep going. You have to also hold yourself accountable. And that's probably the hardest part about changing habits, is having an accountability system or support along the way. Because a lot of us know the things that we should be doing, but a lot of us just aren't very consistent and disciplined in doing them long term. So how can you set up a little accountability appointments and support within your life? And that's one of the things that we do here at Debt Free Dad, is offer support and accountability to people who want to get out of debt. And we give them those accountability appointments so that helps them stick to their plan long term. It
mm,
also puts them in a community of other people who are also working on changing their habits. And that's the other thing, is getting yourself around other like-minded people that are also striving for a better financial life. Because the reality, Steve, and you probably know, is, 6 to 7 out of 10 households are living paycheck to paycheck right now.
mm,
So that means, the majority of people that we hang out with are, unfortunately, sadly, broke. And if we stay within those groups, and again, I'm not saying kick your friends and your family out of your life by any means, but we just need to be more mindful of the financial conversations and things that we are doing based on our social groups. Because if you're hanging around with a lot of people who aren't managing their money properly, you likely aren't going to be either. So getting yourself outside of those groups, finding other, it could be digital groups like on Facebook groups, it could be people in your community, but other people who are having better conversations, or people who are striving towards better financial health. Because you get yourself around those people, you're going to begin to start having some different thoughts, different ideas come in your mind, and you're going to be willing to try some different things because you have these goals that you want to reach.
absolutely. And you raised some interesting points. One, you talked about um, meals and planning and everything, and getting into, my wife and I get into this sometimes. We're coming home from work, we're exhausted. Well, what's in the refrigerator? What's there to cook? Let's just order a pizza, and you end up
Yeah.
going out to dinner or getting takeout because you didn't plan meals for the week, and make a shopping list and go to the supermarket and get the food so you have it, and you
Yeah.
have your list of dishes that you're going to have. So it's that planning. So that helps, and getting into that discipline, and you do that, and you'll start naturally lowering, at least, things like food. And I'm sure that those kind of planning habits apply to other areas. Secondly, you talk about goals. It's harder to stick to a budget when your goal is to have enough money to pay the credit cards. Well, that's no fun,
Yeah.
right? And there's nothing in it for you other than maybe reducing money stress because you're paying down your debt. But it's like eating food that's good for you, right?
Yeah. That's
It's
not
no
fun.
fun. So
Yeah.
you're trying to squeeze out this extra money so you can pay debt, but you need to look at a longer term of what your goals are, because if there's something in it for you in these goals, then it makes it easier to stick to it. I had a
Right.
guest on the show a few weeks ago. She and her husband live in an old house, and they needed to replace the windows. And that was important to them. And because this was a custom built house, every window was custom,
Wow.
and they had a lot of windows. So they say, okay, well, do we want to spend money on this? And they'd look at it and say, that's a window and a half. Nope. Do we want to spend? Nope, that's half a window. And they kept that goal in mind, and all of their financial decisions were in alignment with goals that they had, goals for themselves. They wanted to have new windows. Okay. Or whether it's that, or, that's one plane ticket on our vacation. No, we're
Yep.
not spending that money. So I think getting into that, seeing it in a positive light that way towards a goal that you want to achieve,
Yeah.
that has some value to you emotionally, it'll make it a lot easier to stay on target.
Yeah. The other thing too, I've had a lot of people have success with kind of thinking through purchases and mindset is also thinking about how long do you have to work to actually purchase the item that you're looking at buying?
Mm-hmm.
How long did it take you to have to buy that? And it's like, this is especially good if people don't really care for their jobs all that much. I had to work like 6 hours. It's not worth 6 hours of my time to buy that item. I don't want to buy it, right? But if you think in those terms too, it's
Mm-hmm.
good. I like the window one. That's cool. That's a good idea.
And it keeps it, yeah, it keeps things in alignment.
Yeah.
Um, so that's getting better financial habits, and we also, this goes kind of, we kind of answer the next question I had, which is ways to reduce impulsive and wasteful
Yeah.
spending.
Yeah.
Uh, you see, one place we're seeing it now is um, with streaming services.
Oh yeah. Big
When they
time.
first came out, they were cheap. They were nothing, a couple bucks a month, $3, $4, $5 a month, and you get all this content. And now, as there's a shakedown in the industry, people are realizing, hey, we got to charge more money if we're going to produce enough original content. And some of the streaming services are going to the wayside. Others of them are um, starting to raise their prices significantly. And worse than anything else, that this specter that I see, you go back to cable TV, and cable TV, they wanted to sell you this bundle. Oh,
Yeah.
you can get HBO and Showtime and all this, and they get you to spend more money by bundling a lot of attractive services together. Well,
Right.
now streaming services are doing exactly the same thing.
Yep.
Disney is bundling with Hulu.
Yep.
Uh, CBS, which became Paramount Plus, bundled with Showtime, which was another studio and streaming service that they had. So now, although it's voluntary, you have more of a line item veto. It's starting to become like cable, and starting to become as expensive as cable. So all those streaming services that you signed up for because they were cheap and because they had a show you wanted to watch are starting to cost you a lot more as things go up, and
Yeah.
maybe you need to take another look at it.
Yeah. I think the last average I heard about those, I want to say it was just a little over $150 a month is what people are spending on average on streaming services right now.
Well, that makes
Um,
me feel better. We're
and
not near that, but
yeah, and apps and things like that. Yeah, it's $150. Yeah. Yeah, impulsive and wasteful spending. It's tough. Shopify says that 40 to 80% of all purchases are made on impulse.
Mhm.
40 to 80%. And 50% of all grocery is made on impulse. So this is a monster. And I think, and again, going through your expenses, seeing those habits, seeing those things, I think is going to help you sit up a little bit straighter and make you more aware, which I think is a big key in changing a lot of your purchasing habits. But
Mhm.
also being willing to give your purchases time, I think, is another one. I encourage our members to, we call it the 24-hour rule. Like, hey, if you find something that's not in your budget,
Mhm.
don't tell yourself no. Just tell yourself wait for 24 hours. And if the same urge is there the next day to go get it, and maybe you can work it into your budget, then go get it and buy it.
Mhm.
But the rule is if you want to get out of debt, you can't use debt. We're not using debt. We have to find another way to do it.
Mhm.
But people are so scared about telling themselves no, or budget is so limiting. Instead of doing any of those, just say, I'm going to wait 24 hours to see if this is something I really want. Because, I mean, Steve, I mean, we always talk about financial education in schools. I also think we need to start educating people on the tactics of marketing, because marketing is so good. I mean, marketing today is so sophisticated. They're so good at getting you to spend money that you didn't even plan on spending, or going into debt and with money you don't even have to buy stuff, right? That's how good marketing is, and
Mhm.
that's how smart they've gotten with it. So I think, we've got to understand that when we are in that mode of impulsiveness and we want to buy something, your emotions are all in. You need that item. Well, if you give that time, those emotions will go away. And I guarantee you 90 to 95% of the things that you think you want, you'll never go back and buy them.
Mhm.
And that's because that emotion is gone, right? So I think giving those purchases time, and again, I want to sound like a broken record with the goals, but I think also establishing those short-term and long-term goals, I think will cut down on a lot of impulsive and wasteful spending because again, it's like you just mentioned with your example with the windows. Well, if I buy this, then I can't have this yet.
Right.
It's going to
It's an
push this
opportunity
out
cost.
further away, right? Yeah, opportunity cost, exactly. So I think, all of these things kind of work together in
Mhm.
battling those impulsive and wasteful spendings.
Well, when you mentioned that Shopify statistic, it didn't surprise me at all because the flip side of that, I'm an attorney and I own a business. You own a business, and you have to market that business. And there is a tried and true and proven principle of marketing is that people make buying decisions emotionally and then justify them with logic.
Yeah.
And you also have to create that sense of urgency. You don't want people waiting 24 hours. Your marketing is intentionally playing to emotion because
Yep.
that's how people make buying decisions. And you
Correct.
create a sense of urgency because if you let them think about it, logic may take over and you lose the sale.
Right.
So it's no surprise at all to me from knowing it from the seller's end of things that
Yeah.
that's what the buyer is up against. And I think that waiting the 24 hours to cool off and do you really need it is a good idea.
Yeah. Yep. Totally agree.
So we're talking about mindset in thinking about not only where your money is and what your goals are and setting aside that money to pay down debt so you can be debt free as part of your overall financial freedom plan. But if it's just you, great. But if you're married, there's somebody else in the equation.
Yeah.
So you really have to be on the same page, both of you. And I've seen as a bankruptcy attorney, I sit with couples that are filing bankruptcies and shake my head because I know which one's the problem.
Yeah.
And it's because they don't have the same money mindset. They, in
Yeah.
fact, have very different money mindsets. So couples have to have or be able to at least agree on these goals. So, how do you recommend people talk about money in a relationship so they can get on that same page?
Yeah, it's a tough topic in a relationship. Money fights and arguments are one of the leading causes of divorce in the United
Mhm.
States, and it is hard because your money mindset is shaped at such a young age, and everyone is raised a little bit differently. They grow up different with money, different relationships with money, and now you're going to mash these two things together in a relationship, um, and most couples don't ever really talk about it, even as they're kind of considering marriage before they get married. In fact, I've done plenty of workshops live with couples all across the United States and asked these couples as I was traveling, how many of you have gone or went to some sort of financial education before you got married or while you got married to get on the same page with money? And hardly anyone raises their hands, right? But it is such a thorn in so many relationships.
Mhm.
So I think the first thing, if you're already married, obviously if you're not married, start talking about this stuff sooner rather than later, right?
Right.
It will serve you so well. In fact, I would suggest, especially if you're in a new relationship, have that money conversation early because marriage does not make it easier. It's gonna make it harder. So if there's red flags already and you're not married, pay attention to those and address them to make sure you guys get on the same page. But if you're already married and money is a little bit of a sore topic in your relationship, I think the best place to start is instead of talking about the money side of things, have a conversation about how your financial situation is making you feel.
Mhm.
Because there is a lot of emotion with financial struggles, embarrassment, shame. I'm afraid.
Mhm.
I'm not sleeping at night. I'm worrying about my finances while I'm at work. Upwards of 50% of the workforce worries about their finances while they're working because they're struggling, right?
Mhm.
So I think having that conversation with your partner about how you feel rather than starting it about money or we need to do this better or we need to cut that out, which is always probably going to provoke more of an argument. Instead, talk about how you feel and let the other person talk about how they feel. And then start sitting down and asking yourself these questions. In fact, I have a free guide that we offer on our website, and it's just called the 10 couple questions for couples. 10 questions you answer, 10 financial questions you answer as a couple. You do these separately, you bring them back to the table. So
Mhm.
things like, how do you feel about debt? how do you feel about what are some financial goals that are important to you? What are some non-negotiable items for you? Maybe you have a circle of friends and you want to be able to go out to dinner with them once a month. Or maybe there's a certain vacation that you want to take once a year. Or you have a hobby that you really love and you want to make sure that you're able to do that and we can be able to put money towards that. Like, talk about these things, because these are going to be the things that become an issue in a relationship if you don't communicate about them. All right. The other thing when it comes to couples, we already talked about this, Steve, is a budget. And I think a budget is a great way to start putting some of these things in to these conversations and sitting down together and looking at your expenses together and looking at them in plain sight. And that can
Mhm.
be a scary thing, especially if the two of you haven't really been talking about it. But the more you can talk through that budget and let each person have a say of what's going on, what are we spending our money on, and making the decisions together, the better you're going to be able to communicate throughout the month as life happens. Right.
Mhm.
And then the other thing I would recommend too is try to stay away from the parent child relationship when it comes to managing your money in a relationship. Because what I see too often is one person is solely responsible for the finances and the other person doesn't really play a part in it. But then that one person who doesn't play a part in it wants to do something or wants to buy something. And then the person who's the parent role controlling the finances says, you know what, we just don't have that in the budget this month. We can't afford it. And then the child in the relationship stomps their feet and says, well, I want this and I want it now. And then that starts a fight and argument, right?
Right.
So I get that when we come into a relationship, both of us have, different strengths and weaknesses. And typically there's one person who's better at the finances than the other. It's okay that that person kind of initiates the plan and puts it all together and
Mhm.
implements it throughout the month. But the other person still needs to have a say. You still need to be sitting down and communicating and saying what things are going on, especially if you got kids. And compromise is another big one too, is being willing to, in relationships, a big part of it. You're going to have to lose a few battles here and there to win the overall war,
Mhm.
right? And so be willing to compromise and give a little bit back and forth and work together on that.
Well, I think it's common goals, as you said. The couple points. One, some of them, the person that wants to go out with their friends once a month, and that's very important to them. Well, you need to identify. All right, each of you identifies one or two things that are really almost non-negotiable, things they really want to do, and say, okay, if you can do that, but what are you willing to give up? Well, you can do that. No, we'll make that a priority for you. And then I have a couple things that are kind of non-negotiable to me. We'll make them priority, and I'll be willing to give something else up. So you're not being told no, you can't do something you really want to do, but
Right.
you have the agency and the voice and the ability to say, okay, I want to do this, but I'm willing to give up that in order to get it.
Yeah.
And also, if you're working towards the same goal, if you both want those new windows, if you both want that trip to Disney World, and that you have that emotional aspect, and something comes up, one of them says, "I really want to do this." Well, that's a plane ticket to Disney World. That's a side trip over to Universal Studios or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Oh, you're right. I really want to do that more, and that can help people on track because you're right. Nothing leads to more divorces than problems with money. In fact, there's a rather cynical saying among bankruptcy attorneys: one divorce is worth two bankruptcies, and, and because it's so common. I mean, it's a cynical
Yeah.
thing to say, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, I've seen it. But I think those common goals help.
Yeah. And I think, another good thing that can come, and I've had so many people have success with this, is listen to podcasts like Steve has, like our podcast, Every Dad podcast. Like, listen to these podcasts around your partner.
Mhm.
And I know that sounds weird, but when you have a third party involved, and I call that a third party, we would be the third party as this podcast is playing.
Right.
It opens up conversations within your relationship that you normally wouldn't have, because you're either gonna your partner or you are either gonna like what we have to say or you're not gonna like what we have to say, and you can discuss that openly because we said it, not your partner. So you're
Yeah.
able to have a
True.
much better conversation about it because you're talking about what we're talking about, not necessarily what you did and what you did wrong and you're not doing this right, right?
Mm.
I've had a lot of people have success with that, where they'll play our podcast and their partner all of a sudden a few months later is like, I'm starting to do that stuff that you've been listening to on that podcast. And all of a sudden they start coming around, right? So that works
Yeah.
really, really well.
So we've gotten to the point where we got a handle on our money. We know what our cash flow is. We've set our goals and we're ready to go. And we have this pool of money that we're going to use to try and pay down debt. So I'm going to ask you a question I ask a lot of my guests on this topic. I call it the personal finance version of boxers or briefs.
Yeah.
Snow, snowball or avalanche?
I am a snowball fan.
And for those of you out there that don't know what we're talking about, folks, these are two different methods of paying down debt. The snowball method, you start with the smallest balance first, pay it off, and then work your way up to the largest balance. And it gives you more of an immediate feeling of accomplishment because you've paid off, you have one less debt as you work your way up, and it gives you more patience with the larger amounts. The avalanche method is to pay the debt first in the debts in the order of highest to lowest interest rates on that debt. So that you're ultimately paying less in dollars for the smaller for the debt at lower interest rate. So you've indicated that you're a snowball man.
I
What
am.
has you picking that method?
Well, I am, again, I think I've realized, especially my own journey in getting out of debt, how behavior and how habits and all that stuff affect your financial decisions. And I think you can use that same psychology in getting out of debt. When you get those quick wins, it feels good. It's a check mark. It feels like you're making progress. Whereas, again, depending on your situation, if you're using the avalanche method and say your credit card is a 29% interest credit card and it's got like a $6,000 balance and you don't have a ton of extra money to throw at that, that's like taking little tiny bites out of this giant elephant. And I feel like you're gonna throw in the towel and give up because you're not gonna really be seeing the progress. Mathematically speaking, the avalanche method is gonna save you more money, but studies have proven that more people are successful with the snowball method because, again, it feeds off the psychology with getting those quick wins and creating that momentum, right? And that's really kind of what we're looking for. Now, I am also a fan of doing a hybrid of the two as well. Like, for instance, I think it does make sense to start looking at interest rates when you get like a windfall of money. Like, for instance, if you got a tax return, let's say you got a sizable tax return and you want to pay off some debt, it might make sense to say, hey, maybe we attack one that has a higher interest rate because we have a big chunk of money that we can get rid of this debt with. It might make sense to not follow the snowball in that way. You also might want to look at minimum payments too. Sometimes you could have a lower balance loan or debt, but it's got a high minimum payment. And that high minimum payment every month is really putting some stress on your cash flow every month. It could make sense to look at minimum payment and say, I'm going to use this windfall of cash or this lump sum of cash to pay down that debt so it frees up cash flow every month. So I think, generally speaking, snowball I think it is my favorite, but I think you can go outside the rules and bend the rules a little bit when you have some of these times where you get windfalls of cash. Maybe you get a bonus at work, again, a tax return, could be, proceeds from an inheritance, things like that. I think you can go outside the rules.
Mhm. So all right, so we've gotten control of our money, control of our money habits. We've gotten a fund of money to pay down debt, and we've paid down our debt. Now, the next goal is to stay out of debt.
Yeah.
Because you can pay down again. It goes back to money habits, where you climb out of a hole only to dig another one. So the way to do that is once you pay down the debt, is to create an emergency fund and once you've used that extra money to pay off debt, you use that extra money and put it into a savings account as an emergency fund. So if your dishwasher blows up and you have to get a new one, you don't have to put it on the credit card per se, or as much
Right.
of it on the credit card, because you have money in your emergency fund to pay for it. So you have your budget that tells you month to month, money in, money out, what you in regular living expenses, and expected expenses, but unexpected expenses are taken care of through this emergency fund so that you don't fall back on the credit cards. Uh, what's the so How do you create a habit of saving in order to build an emergency fund to do that?
Yeah. So I think you want to make it as automatic as you can. I was the worst saver on the planet, I feel like. So if I can learn to get better at it, I think anybody can. And I think
Uh-huh.
one of the things that made it easier for me was just making the savings automatic every month.
Hmm.
So put the amount of money that you want to save every month and that you want to put into your emergency fund and put it into your budget and just make an automatic transfer to that account every single month. And I think that automatically will create that habit. You won't even miss the money because it will automatically just go over there. You can even, in a lot of cases, with your employers now, you can actually have them direct deposit certain amount of monies in different accounts, I believe, too. So, I mean, there's so many different ways you can make it more automatic where you don't even see the money. But I think it is one of the most important things in getting out of debt is to establish some sort of even a small emergency fund because like you said, Steve, I mean, a lot of the reasons why we are in debt is because of all of the unexpected expenses that pop up. We start swiping credit cards. In fact, the credit card industry and the banks sell you, hey, credit cards are for emergencies.
Yeah.
Well, they don't have to be if you can start saving and put away money, and then you don't have to use the credit cards for emergencies and racking up credit card debt.
Hmm.
So I would say, I mean, $1,000 to $3,000 is a good place to start. I think for most people. I mean, right now, 62% of the American society can't afford a $500 emergency expense without going into debt right now. So I think for most people, $1,000 to $3,000 is a really good goal to get that emergency fund built. That way, like you said, if your washer or dryer goes out, you've got money there. You can go to that little emergency fund, pay for those things, and then go right back to paying down debt. Right.
Right.
So I think large emergency funds, though, super important. 3 to 6 months is absolutely a must. I think there's even now some financial experts that are out there saying 12 months, is the ideal number that you want to be at. But I think to create the habit, though, is to one, get that first emergency fund built, and that little emergency fund will change your life because for most people, $1,000 to $3,000 in a savings account for emergencies is the most amount of money that they've ever had saved for most people. And
Yeah.
when you actually start to see how amazing it is to have that when things happen, that creates again that habit, that momentum. It's like getting that check mark, and it's like, I want to protect this thing because I like having this creates security in my life. I have less stress knowing I got this emergency fund. And people will start to just say, I want to keep putting money into this. I want to keep putting money into this. The other thing too is protect it, especially at first, because we talked about habits, behaviors, and choices. I remember busting into my emergency fund plenty of times for things that weren't emergencies. So, put it into a bank account that you don't have debit card access to. Make it hard to get the money, right?
Yes.
And again, this is just to protect yourself against yourself. And over time, you'll get much better at it, but put it away somewhere where it's not easy to get to, and that'll help too.
Hmm. Absolutely. So you mentioned what I was going to say about you go. There's not just unexpected expenses, but an unexpected loss in income. You get sick, you get
Yeah.
injured, or just temporarily disabled. You lose your job,
Yep.
and you need to be able to survive that. And even if you aren't carrying debt, but you're living paycheck to paycheck, you still have financial stress because you're worried about what might happen. What if I lose my job? What if I get sick?
Yeah.
What if we have another child or whatever the may come in the future that you want to at least protect for, but and plan for. But once you get to that point, you've got good money habits, you've gotten out of debt, you've got your uh, emergency fund, then maybe start planning for retiring someday. Because a lot of
Yeah.
people, most Americans don't think they are ready to retire or would be able to retire.
Right.
So that there's always that next thing on the road to financial freedom. But if you're to the point where you can start saving for retirement, great. And I know my wife and I, at this point, we have a budget, but we have enough elasticity in it, what we call margin money, which is the difference, but the money left over from our net household income after all the bills are paid.
Right.
That's of an amount and that's while already contributing to retirement and everything else, all of our other goals in our emergency fund, that we can make small purchases and things like that without having to worry. Where's the money going to come from? Some of the large,
Right.
that's a discussion we have. We want
Yeah.
to do this. All right. Not that we can't afford it necessarily, but where's the money going to come from?
Right.
What account are we taking it out of? And that thoughtfulness there. But we don't feel constrained by our budget. And if anything, our budget has made us feel more comfortable
Love
with
that.
our money that we can spend some
Yeah.
without really thinking about it, without causing a financial problem. And that truly is, I think, financial freedom.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. One of the other cool things you mentioned retirement, Stephen, if you're listening to this and you're still early on and you're like you said, you feel like you're one of these individuals who will never be able to retire.
Hmm.
Just if you're looking for, again, a reason on why to get out of debt, just go to your the your debts every single month. Like how much do you pay in your debts, your credit cards, car payments, everything that you have in debt, and then put that into a retirement calculator. So instead of say sending all that stuff to the credit card companies, let's say we're going to pay ourselves and we're going to invest in our future. That is going to create some amazing vision for you and wanting to really get out of debt, because you'll be amazed at how much wealth that you can build once you stop sending everybody else your money and you get to keep some of your income, because your income is your number one wealth producer. I mean, you have to protect it, because
Hmm.
that's going to be the thing that's going to help you build that wealth moving forward. So play with those retirement calculators. It'll really create some excitement for you. If we really got out of this and we could really take control of this is what it could look like. That's pretty cool.
So, a lot of good information, folks. Uh, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, I understand you have some resources, and tell us about what Debt Free Dad does. And we've talked about all this, but if
Yeah.
anybody says, "Hey, maybe the Debt Free Dad can help me," how do people get in touch with you? What kind of services do you provide?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you'd like to get just more information on what we do, the topics we cover, I think the best place to go is just search the Debt Free Dad podcast. You can get that wherever you get your podcasts. We've got some great episodes on there, just really all helping people who are living paycheck to paycheck to get out of that life. We've got 200 plus episodes now, so we've got released 2 episodes per week, so lots of content going out. And again, a lot of great, just motivating stories, success stories, people who are doing this, that I think you'll really really enjoy. The other thing we have for the next level, if you really want to get that support and accountability, which is I think what separates us from a lot of other things out there, the self-help books and the do-it-yourself approaches, is we have our Roots Personal Finance membership, where our members actually come in and we work with our members in a group format. They're put into a community with other people who are working on this. We do group weekly coaching calls with individuals. We work with them. I mean, we basically will give them that attention that they need for an entire year to help them work through all of these things about how to get my budget done. How do I improve my habits and my behaviors? How do I get this first emergency fund built? How do I start using the debt snowball approach and implementing it? Because again, it's one thing to know how to do it all. Implementing it and doing it consistently is the hard part. And that's what we're here to walk people through in our membership.
And also, as you mentioned earlier, if you think about it, as couples, having that third party voice tell you something can make it easier. So your service helps people. Couples may be, kind of conflicted on what to do and how to approach it, and this, that, and the other thing. Your coaching and your programs can provide that third voice that might help people make some decisions and some compromises in their finances and make it a little bit easier to go down this path together.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's for me, one of the proudest things in our membership is we have helped so many couples save their relationship by
Mhm.
going through this program, getting their finances in order, getting them on the same page. And, that's just a byproduct of going through this and doing the work. And it's amazing. Not only does it change your relationship, but it'll change really your entire family and your
Mhm.
future. I just had a guest on my podcast today that I just interviewed earlier. She's a mom of 3 kids. She's been doing this for 5 months. She's already saved and paid off $10,000 in 5 months.
Wow.
I mean, she's killing it. And this is just, I mean, we have so many of those stories that people are just, and again, this is during times where people think it's impossible to get ahead. Inflation's high, expenses are high, the economy is, interest rates are crazy. Like we're never going to get ahead. These are normal everyday people, making normal incomes that are coming in, and they are really making some great changes and really having amazing results. So if they can do it, you can too.
I think it's showing in the economy too. There are some companies that are struggling, and one recently filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and then reason they gave was, with inflation and post pandemic and everything, people aren't doing as much discretionary spending as they used to. So they're saying, look, we got to pay the bills. It costs more for food. It costs more for gas in the car, everything
Yeah.
else. So, on the one hand, businesses are hurting, but on the other hand, it looks to be a sign that individuals are starting to get better priorities when it comes to their money
Yeah.
and be more money responsible.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. And
All
again, I
right.
think, we do want to just I think you want to get to the point where you have a good relationship with your finances, where,
Mhm.
you work hard for your money. You should be able to go out and spend money and have fun and enjoy life. That's what it's really about getting to. It's not about cutting everything out and going scorched earth either. I think there is a good balance there that you can have. So I think the more you do the stuff that we talked about on today's podcast, the better your cash flow will get, the less financial stress you'll have, the better outlook you'll have, and you'll be able to start making purchases without guilt and enjoy things, and it'll be so much better. Grass is greener on the other side where financial freedom lives. It really is.
Absolutely. All right, Bradford, thanks for coming on the show. And I'm sure the listeners got a lot out of this episode, and will help them to get out of debt and be debt free themselves.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. Thanks so much for having us.